The American Academy of Pediatrics is back, and they have a new blunder. They've blundered into a tweet that created quite a firestorm online. And I got to read you this tweet because I think this is emblematic of so many of their problems, and I think it captures a lot of it. Here's the tweet. Babies and young children study faces, so you may worry that having masked caregivers would harm children's language development. There are no studies to support this concern. Young children will use other clues like gestures and tone of voice. That's their statement. And it's part of a long thread trying to encourage mask use. Here's what I have as a problem with this little tweet of theirs. Yes, there are no studies that prove definitively that having a baby be taken care of by caretakers wearing a mask covering half their face is bad for that baby's language development, their future IQ, their future prospects. We don't know. But the reason is because no one's studying it. And it's never happened before. In the history of humanity, people have never put a mask on their face for many, many hours during the day for months and months on end for babies in daycare. That's never happened. So they don't know that it's not deleterious. And in fact, common sense suggests that the face might serve some purpose and there might be some reason why babies like to look at the face and something might be lost. Now, I'm not saying that on balance, it isn't a good idea to have their policy. They might be right on balance, but to discount the concern prima facie, that is really rather woefully inadequate from an organization that's supposed to be defending children. And that's what really bothers me about the AAP. They have a track record, in my opinion, of making recommendations when they could just be quiet. When you don't know, when you have no clue, when you have no credible evidence, you don't have to recommend anything at all. But they insist on making recommendations. Here are a few. Lay that baby to bed on its stomach. Oh, actually, that was a big mistake. You got to put it on its back. Their next mistake, maybe about 20 years ago, when they advised people at high risk of peanut allergies, don't let the child have access to peanuts. Well, it turned out that was precisely the wrong thing to do. They could have actually done the randomized trials that showed the right thing to do, which is early exposure to peanut allergens. Those trials were eventually done. They could have done those trials before they made the recommendation, but they chose to make a recommendation without those studies. And here, they're discounting a very legitimate concern, which I think is really understood globally. And that's why in Europe, they have more sense than the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is so singularly focused on masking the caretakers for babies and very young children that they have forgotten that there's not a lot of credible evidence for some of these claims. They could do the credible evidence. You could do some cluster randomized controlled trials to adjudicate the difference between the WHO's position, which is don't mask kids under 6, and the CDC's position, which is mask kids from 2 to 5. That's a global difference. There's differences in policies between Sweden, Switzerland, the United States. There's equipoise. They could do these studies. We could ask, is it actually a wise thing for the caretakers to wear the mask? Does it actually slow the spread amongst caretakers in the facility, amongst babies? Now, these babies that are being in daycare for prolonged periods of time, they're often the children of people who are essential workers. It's a vulnerable population of people. And so for the AAP to be so flippant in their pronouncement, I think they deserve a great deal of scorn. This isn't a random idiot on the internet. There's so many of them. This is the American Academy of Pediatrics, and this is the standard they're setting. It's as if they have capitulated to groupthink, to tribal ideology, and they cannot use reason or science to try to adjudicate these claims. So I think the pile on the AAP was legitimate. Now, some people say, well, what, you think you know more of the AAP? I was like, on this issue? Yeah, I think they got it wrong. And I think you don't have to be a great expert in science to know they got it wrong. It seems a bit bizarre to claim that there is no reason at all to be concerned if a baby never sees a face. Why do we have faces? One might wonder, and one might have a follow-up question for the AAP. So I think it's not really quite daring to question, I think, a very stupid tweet that they should walk back, and a policy they should revisit. Because if they really care about children, they would actually recommend some controlled study to try to sort this out. You got to collect the data. You can't live in a data-free zone for year 2, year 3 of the pandemic. I gave you 1 year. I gave you 1 year to do whatever you wanted with no credible data. I'm not going to give you years 2 and 3. I'm going to make you earn it. You got to have some data if you want to recommend these things indefinitely with no end date in sight. You need to generate credible data. That's part of the science process. Don't say follow the science. Mechanistic science, that's not really persuasive science. We're talking about broad sweeping policies. You need cluster randomization. You need randomized trials of the policy itself. I think there's a big problem in this profession where people don't understand that quasi-experimental retrospective observational studies, that's not good enough for decisions of this magnitude. So I feel bad that they said this. I'm embarrassed by them. I wouldn't want to be associated with them. And our friends in Europe are going to look at this statement and they're going to ask, have they lost their minds, the AAP? And it would be a good question. So those are my thoughts on this stupid tweet, which is emblematic of a broader failure that they have demonstrated, which is a failure to generate evidence and a failure to take some of these concerns seriously, which would lead you to generate the evidence.